I have no idea how to introduce this one. It kind of came from left field. I was reading GURPS Supers only to be completely befuddled because the entire book relies on concepts that weren't introduced in the Characters and Campaigns books. So I thought, okay, I'll just take a quick peek into GURPS Powers, which is where the missing details I need are located. Well, GURPS packs all kinds of details into their books, and I was a fool to think that would just be a quick jaunt to get a little bit of missing context. No. It didn't work that way at all, because GURPS Powers is an entire book dedicated to this one new concept. And that concept is, of course, powers. And it's something that I felt was missing in GURPS, but present in Hero under the name Power Frameworks. Well, here it is. GURPS has a book for everything, including adding features that made me prefer other generic systems to it. So, let's talk about GURPS Powers. GURPS Powers is all about a new mechanic they add that works alongside the rules in the basic set. That mechanic is powers, and this entire book is dedicated to that one mechanic, all 240 some odd pages of it. But it is a very comprehensive 240 pages. The first 2 chapters explain important things about powers and how they work. The remaining chapters are examples, how the previously established rules fit into this new one, and various edge cases. In other words, it's too much for me to concisely go over everything because of how granular and detailed this can get. So, I'm going to start by hitting the high points. Powers are a way to group several different related advantages, like a comic book character's superpowers, if you will. They have 2 story components and 3 mechanical ones. First, the story components, the source of the power and its focus. The source is where the power comes from, such as psychic abilities powered by someone's mind or divine powers granted by a deity. There's a lot of different sources the book suggests and expounds upon, and you can always make up your own or change one of the existing ones if what you're looking for doesn't exist yet. The second is the focus, and that is what phenomenon it can affect or what it does. Do the psychic abilities only let you affect minds, or can you use it to manipulate the world around you? In the case of divine, this would answer the question of, what is the domain of the deity that's granting these powers? These are the fluffier story elements. They don't necessarily have mechanical effects, but should be used as a guideline for determining them. After all, a god of the sea would be very unlikely to grant somebody the ability to fly. But if a player can provide something that makes sense in that context, by all means, allow it. Perhaps the god of the sea causes them to grow albatross wings or something. Next, let's go over the 3 mechanical parts to powers. First and most obvious are the advantages that make up what you can actually do with the power. These are referred to as abilities. Another part is the talent, which is a new way of using the talent advantage. Talents were originally a lump bonus that can be added to any various related skill, and it functions much the same way here. Anything that is an application of the power gets the talent bonus. So, any advantage under it that calls for a roll, or any roll aided by an advantage in this power. Unless the GM says otherwise, it costs 5 points per level given of a power's talent, and should not go any higher than 4 levels. And the last and most important part of a power is the power modifier. It's a special modifier that must be present in every advantage that falls under a given power. There's an entire section in the first chapter dedicated to covering evaluating power modifiers. For the most part, though, it can be thought of as a checklist of what can neutralize any of these powers. This ranges from mundane countermeasures like throwing water on a fire elemental superhero, or something more advanced or esoteric like anti-psychic technology. Bear in mind, these are in addition to whatever an advantage's write-up says will stop them. In practice, you can take the advantage Undying, which at its highest levels can't be stopped, merely delayed by sealing your remains away somehow, and tie it to something like a vampire power. Then, if the power modifier for vampire abilities says that it can't work in the presence of a sacred object, nailing a cross to the vampire's head would be enough to finish them off for good. This sacred object weakness could be a case of mundane countermeasure or an insulator of channeled energy. The rules even say that the two are often so similar in fiction that one can usually count for the other, meaning the fire elemental from earlier could in fact be useless in an aquarium, but does not gain any further discount from their power modifier, because when it comes down to it, it's water dampening the power of fire. For the most part, you can think of the power modifier as a generic weakness every advantage has to take to become an ability in that power. It gives a standard discount at the cost that if you temporarily lose one power for some reason, you lose all of them. Though it also allows you to apply a talent bonus for it being a power. One interesting exception is the cosmic power modifier. This is the only case where your power modifier should be positive. And cosmic is basically the "nuh-uh, my powers are so special that nothing can take them away" modifier. GMs, if you're smart, you will not allow cosmic, as it should only exist as a theoretical. Players, your GM does, in fact, reserve the right to veto any concept you have for a GURPS character if it uses rules they do not approve of. GURPS is a toolkit, not a blank check for whatever nonsense you want. Though, on the subject of cosmic modifiers, GURPS Powers also introduces a tiered system of cosmic powers, where only an equal or higher level of cosmic can counteract another cosmic power, which is kind of similar to how Auspex and Obfuscation from Vampire the Masquerade worked, super senses and seeming like you're invisible. And this was also how generational strength could affect certain abilities that vampires had in this game, such as how the Dominate discipline wouldn't work on a vampire of a stronger generation. And further worth noting, back in 1993, GURPS did have a sourcebook for Vampire the Masquerade. So this may be an example of GURPS taking an established set of rules, making them generic, and then codifying them in a later edition. But I digress. To reiterate, powers have three mechanical parts: the abilities, which are the advantages granted by the power modifier, which is a sort of weakness everything in the power should have, and talent, which is a blanket bonus added to anything that makes use of the power. The rest of the powers book is considerations for making powers, stuff that I frankly can't put into better words than the original writers did, and as I mentioned earlier, that I also can't easily generalize, such as the descriptions of various edge cases and how the concepts might appear in fiction. And several examples, like half the book is sample write-ups, enough that you could use them either as a point of reference for what you've got in mind, or just straight up as they're presented a la carte. There's even a chapter filled with all kinds of optional rules for how powers can be used. Rather than cover all of it, I'm just going to pick out one of the optional rules that really stood out to me and show it to you guys. This is one I like to call "holding hands makes your power stronger." To be more specific, it's one of the optional rules for combining two characters' powers to produce greater effects. The rules state that characters need to have the same source, such as all divine or all psychics. Then they need to be in physical contact, either directly or by holding on to somebody that's acting as sort of a bridge. Then everybody takes a concentrate maneuver, the combat action of "shut up, I'm trying to think here." Everybody that succeeds has their powers linked. Anybody who fails can still act as a bridge for those that succeeded though. And this is where the shenanigans start. One person in the group takes the role of being the leader for an action. They use their base talent and the highest ability level of all members within the group, meaning a leader can technically use an ability they don't possess this way. Additionally, a bonus to talent is added based on half the talent rating of people with the same power, and a fourth from members who only have the same source. Further, there's a bonus ability to level based on other members who have the same ability being used, half from members with the same power, and a fourth from members with a different source. Those extra levels can either empower the ability further, or if it's based on an advantage that doesn't have levels, it can instead add new positive modifiers or buy off negative ones. And finally, Any fatigue points that need to be spent on the power can be divided among the members of the group as they agree. The drawbacks to linking powers this way can be severe though. First, the result of any critical failure affects everyone in the group that's using the power. Second, if a power has something like limited uses or you're using the repeated attempt rules, each use of the power counts for all members of the group. This one's a little complicated, so let me illustrate with an example. Let's say we have 3 characters, Freddy, Pyrojack, and Bone Buddy with the following stats. They all have a power with the source magic, with Freddy and Pyrojack having the focus fire, and Bone Buddy has the focus of darkness. They decide to link their powers together so that they can combine the strength of their magic. First, they come into physical contact and all use the concentrate action. If they all succeed, on their next turn they can begin combining their powers. Freddy chooses to be the leader for the first use of the combined power. He has a talent of 4 with fire magic, and since this is his own talent, he uses that as the base talent score. Pyrojack, meanwhile, has a talent of 2. Since he and Freddy have the same focus and source, half of this gets added to the talent score they'll use for the roll, a +1. Bone Buddy has the same source, but not the same focus, so even though his talent is 4, he only adds 1/4 of that, another +1. This means the group has a total talent of 6 for this roll, assuming the GM allows you to go that high. Next, since Freddy has Agi, an innate attack at level 2, but Pyrojack has Agi Lao, an innate attack at level 4, Freddy can choose to use this instead, even though it's not his power. Freddy still adds half of his innate attack level to the ability, since he has the same source and focus required for Pyrojack's innate attack, an additional 1 level. Bone Buddy has Mudoon, also an innate attack rated at level 4, but since he has a different focus, he only adds 1/4 of this rating, another additional level. This means, all told, Freddy and company get a total of 6 talent and 6 levels of innate attack with their combined powers this way, which would result in 66 of damage against their target if they hit, and a very bad time if their target happens to be an ordinary human with 10 HP and no damage resistance. An important caveat worth mentioning though, there's also rules regarding coordinating attacks to gain other effects when making an attack roll. The coordinating attack rules is actually the recommended alternative for combining powers if your goal is to gang up on one target. And it doesn't necessarily require the use of the power rules either. Like I've said before, GURPS is a toolkit, and you'll drive yourself insane if you try to use every rule as it's printed, especially since many of the edge cases presented in GURPS Power have this many steps. GURPS Powers is a very useful book. It introduces a useful structure for giving a character many different advantages that are related. These can work for a superhero game, or they could also represent the amazing abilities someone would get in a fantasy game. And since GURPS is more or less an everything under the hood is displayed out in the open kind of game, that means somebody with too much free time could convert certain other games into a completely different experience. The drawback, though, is that this is still GURPS. It's a massive toolbox with a lot of options, and the onus of balancing it or modifying it to fit the flavor you want is mostly up to the GM. If you simply allow everything in the books as they're written, you can wind up with a massive mess with no coherent identity. And that unfortunately puts a lot of work on the GM, who can now add game designer to their list of required roles for this hobby. Despite this though, GURPS Powers is a great book for any enthusiast of GURPS, and is even required reading before you get into GURPS Supers. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful or helpful, give me one of those thumbs up likes. And if you want to hear more about complicated or esoteric role-playing games, or just GURPS in general, subscribe as well. With all that said, I am Aro Derashero, and I will see you all next time.